I was standing in my kitchen on that frigid January morning, watching the snow pile up outside my window in Boulder, Colorado, when I heard the unmistakable sound of metal crunching against something solid. The coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips as I processed what I'd just heard. My stomach dropped because I knew, somehow I just knew that whatever had happened was going to become my problem. I set down my mug and rushed to the front door, yanking it open to a blast of freezing air and swirling snowflakes. The scene before me would have been almost comical if I hadn't immediately realized the headache it was about to cause. There, wedged against the decorative boulder I'd placed at the edge of my driveway, was a silver Lexus SUV with its front bumper crumpled like an accordion. And standing next to it, phone already pressed to her ear, was Patricia Henderson, the president of our Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association and the most insufferable woman I'd ever had the misfortune of living near. Patricia was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the word Karen. Mid-50s, with that signature blonde bob haircut that somehow defied both wind and logic, always perfectly styled. She wore expensive athletic wear that had never seen actual exercise, and her face was fixed in a permanent expression of entitled displeasure. Today, she'd added a white puffer jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I grabbed my own jacket and trudged out into the snow, which was already 6 inches deep and still coming down hard. The Weather Service had warned everyone to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary. Apparently, Patricia hadn't gotten that memo, or more likely, she decided it didn't apply to her. "Patricia, what happened?" I called out as I approached, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to go well. She spun around, her face red from either the cold or anger, probably both. Isaac Patterson, thank God you're here. Look what your driveway did to my car." I blinked at her, snowflakes landing on my eyelashes. "What my driveway did? Patricia, you drove into my property. Your driveway is a hazard," she shrieked, gesturing wildly at the perfectly normal concrete driveway I'd had professionally installed 3 years ago. "There's ice everywhere, and that ridiculous rock you insisted on placing there despite my warnings that it violated HOA aesthetic guidelines is now a safety hazard." I took a deep breath, watching the vapor cloud form in the freezing air. "The rock is landscaping. It's well within my property line and doesn't violate any guidelines. I checked before I put it there specifically because I knew you'd have something to say about it." "Don't you take that tone with me," Patricia snapped. "I'm the HOA president, and I was conducting official business, inspecting properties to ensure everyone is maintaining proper snow removal procedures. Your driveway was not adequately cleared." I looked down at my driveway. It was currently covered in 6 inches of fresh snow, just like every other driveway in the neighborhood, because the snow had started falling less than 2 hours ago at 5 in the morning. "Patricia, it's 7 a.m. The snow just started. Nobody's driveways are cleared yet." "The HOA bylaws clearly state that driveways must be cleared within 4 hours of snowfall cessation," she said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through it with one gloved finger. "Cessation. That means when it stops snowing. It's still actively snowing, Patricia." She ignored me completely. "I need your insurance information. My car is damaged because you failed to maintain your property safely. This boulder," she kicked at it with her designer snow boot, "is an attractive nuisance and a hazard. I'm going to need you to pay for all my repairs." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You've got to be kidding me. You drove your car onto my property, hit my landscaping, and now you want me to pay for your repairs. I wouldn't have driven onto your property if I hadn't needed to avoid the ice patch on your driveway that extends into the street," she said, her voice rising. "This is clearly your fault. Either you pay for the repairs, or I'll have no choice but to levy fines against you for maintaining a hazardous property and file a lawsuit. Patricia, go ahead and call your insurance. Tell them exactly what happened. I'm going back inside where it's warm." "Isaac Patterson, don't you dare walk away from me," she screamed as I turned around. "I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting about this. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." I waved without turning around and headed back to my front door. Behind me, I could hear her screeching into her phone, probably calling her husband to come help her. I felt bad for the guy. Martin Henderson was actually decent when his wife wasn't around, but he'd long ago learned that disagreeing with Patricia was a losing battle. Back inside my warm kitchen, I grabbed my phone and took several photos through the window of Patricia's car, wedged against my boulder, making sure to capture the tire tracks, showing exactly how she'd left the street and driven up onto my driveway. Then I threw on my snow gear and went back out to take more photos up close, documenting everything from multiple angles. Patricia glared at me the entire time but didn't try to stop me. "I'm documenting evidence for my insurance company," I explained calmly. "Good, because I'm doing the same thing," she retorted, snapping her own photos. "These will clearly show the hazardous conditions you maintained." 20 minutes later, a tow truck arrived, somehow having made it through the increasingly dangerous road conditions. The driver, a heavy-set guy named Tom who I recognized from around town, looked at the scene and shook his head. "Madam, you know the roads are all under a winter storm warning, right?" he said to Patricia. "What were you doing out in this?" "I had important HOA business," Patricia said imperiously. "Just get my car out of here." Tom shrugged and got to work. As he was loading the Lexus onto his flatbed, he caught my eye and mouthed, "Sorry, man." I gave him a sympathetic nod. He clearly knew Patricia's reputation, too. After they left, I spent an hour clearing my driveway with my snowblower, which I would have done anyway once the snow let up. My next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Robert, waved at me from his porch. "Saw the whole thing," he called out. "Patricia's finally lost it completely. That woman thinks she owns the whole neighborhood. She's convinced I need to pay for her repairs," I called back. Robert snorted. "Good luck with that, Patricia. My Ring doorbell caught everything. I'll send you the footage." I could have kissed the old man. "Robert, you're a lifesaver. That woman's been a thorn in this neighborhood's side for 5 years. Happy to help." True to his word, Robert emailed me the footage within the hour. It clearly showed Patricia's Lexus driving slowly down the street, then suddenly accelerating and turning sharply into my driveway, losing control on the snow-covered surface, and sliding directly into the boulder. There was no ice patch extending into the street, no hazardous conditions beyond normal winter weather, and definitely no reason for her to have been on my driveway at all. I forwarded the video to my insurance company with a detailed explanation of events. My agent, a no-nonsense woman named Jennifer, called me back within 30 minutes. "Isaac, this is pretty straightforward," she said. "She was driving on your property and hit your landscaping. Her insurance should cover her vehicle, but you have zero liability here. If she tries to sue, we'll defend you, but honestly, she doesn't have a leg to stand on." "She's threatening HOA fines and an emergency board meeting," I explained. Jennifer sighed. "HOA, look, document everything. Every interaction, every email, every threat. If she starts abusing her position in the HOA to retaliate against you, that's a separate legal issue." That afternoon, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Patricia had wasted no time. The letter informed me that an emergency HOA board meeting had been scheduled for 6 p.m. that evening to discuss property hazards and violations at my address. I was strongly encouraged to attend. I called my friend Derek, who was a real estate attorney, and explained the situation. He laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Isaac, she's insane," he finally managed. "But yeah, you should go to the meeting. Bring all your documentation and record it if Colorado's a one-party consent state for recordings." "It is," I confirmed. I'd looked that up a year ago during a previous Patricia-related incident involving my mailbox placement. Perfect. Record everything. If she's using her HOA position to retaliate against you for not accepting liability in what was clearly her fault, that's abuse of power and you might have grounds for a harassment lawsuit. That evening, I drove through still snowy streets to the community center where HOA meetings were held. The parking lot was nearly empty, unsurprising given the weather. Inside, I found Patricia, 2 other board members, and about 5 other homeowners who'd braved the conditions. Patricia sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her expression one of grim satisfaction when she saw me enter. The other 2 board members were Linda Morrison and Steve Chang. Linda was generally reasonable but terrified of Patricia. Steve usually tried to be a voice of reason but picked his battles carefully. "Thank you all for coming in these difficult conditions," Patricia began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We have a serious safety matter to address. As many of you know, I was injured this morning while conducting official HOA business." "Injured?" I interrupted. "You didn't mention anything about being injured this morning." Patricia's lips thinned. "I'm still processing the trauma, Isaac. I could have been killed." "But you weren't injured," I pressed. "Emotional trauma is still trauma," she snapped. "Now, as I was saying, I was nearly killed this morning due to hazardous conditions maintained by one of our residents. Isaac Patterson has placed a large boulder on his property that creates a dangerous condition, especially in winter weather. The boulder is landscaping," I said calmly, pulling out my phone and setting it on the table to record. "It's been there for 3 years. It's well within my property boundaries and violates no HOA guidelines. It's an attractive nuisance and a hazard," Patricia insisted. "I'm proposing that the board vote to require its removal and levy a fine against Mr. Patterson for the hazardous conditions that led to damage to my vehicle." "Patricia," Steve spoke up carefully, "can you explain exactly how Isaac's boulder damaged your car?" "I was driving past his property to inspect snow removal compliance when I encountered an ice patch extending from his driveway into the street. To avoid a collision with oncoming traffic, I was forced to turn into his driveway, where the hazardous boulder was obscured by snow. It was an impressive fiction. I had to give her credit for creativity." "That's not what happened," I said, pulling out my laptop. "Would the board like to see the security footage from my neighbor's camera?" Patricia's face went pale, then red. "That's a violation of privacy. It's a camera pointed at his own property that happens to capture the street," I said. "Completely legal. Would you like to see it or not?" Steve and Linda both nodded eagerly. I played the footage on my laptop, turning it so everyone could see. The video made it crystal clear. Patricia had driven onto my property, lost control, and hit the boulder. There was no ice patch, no oncoming traffic, and no reason for her to have been in my driveway at all. The room was silent when the video ended. "Well," Steve said slowly, "that's pretty clear-cut. Patricia, you drove onto Isaac's property. I don't see any basis for fines or required boulder removal." "That video could be doctored," Patricia sputtered. "It's time-stamped and I can provide the original file," I said. I've already shared it with my insurance company. They've confirmed I have zero liability in this incident. Linda cleared her throat nervously. Patricia, maybe we should just let insurance handle this. I don't think the HOA should be involved in what's clearly a personal matter. It's not a personal matter when it involves property hazards in our community. Patricia's voice was rising to that particular pitch that meant she was losing control. That boulder is a hazard and needs to be removed. I'm calling for a vote. I'm voting no, Steve said immediately. Also no, Linda added quietly. Patricia looked like she was about to explode. Fine. Then I'm issuing a personal fine to Isaac Patterson for failure to adequately maintain his driveway in winter conditions. The HOA bylaws clearly state, the bylaws state that driveways must be cleared within 4 hours of the cessation of snowfall. I interrupted, pulling out my own copy of the bylaws. At 7 a.m. when you drove into my boulder, it had been snowing for 2 hours and was still actively snowing. I cleared my driveway at 9 a.m., well within the required time frame once the snow stopped. I'm still issuing the fine, Patricia said stubbornly. On what grounds? Steve asked. On the grounds that I'm the HOA president and I said so. Even Linda looked shocked at that statement. Steve shook his head. Patricia, that's not how this works. You can't just issue arbitrary fines because you're angry. Watch me, Patricia snarled, standing up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. Isaac, expect your fine notice in the mail. She stormed out of the community center, leaving the rest of us staring at each other in bewilderment. She's lost it, Steve muttered. Isaac, don't pay any fine she sends you. That's not a legitimate HOA action. I'm documenting everything, I assured him. Over the next week, things escalated rapidly. Patricia sent me a fine notice for $500 for maintaining hazardous winter conditions. I responded in writing, copying the entire HOA board, refuting the fine with documentation, and requesting a formal hearing. Patricia responded by issuing another fine for frivolous appeals. Then she started driving past my house multiple times a day, taking photos of my property. My Ring doorbell caught her measuring the distance from my boulder to the property line at 2 a.m. one night. She filed complaints about my trash cans being visible from the street, even though they were in my garage. She cited me for having my Christmas lights up past January 15th, even though half the neighborhood still had theirs up. Every complaint was documented, refuted, and shared with Steve and Linda. Both board members were increasingly concerned about Patricia's behavior, but seemed unsure how to rein her in. She's the president, Linda explained to me apologetically over the phone. We can't just remove her mid-term without a vote of the entire community. Then call for a vote, I suggested. That requires signatures from 20% of homeowners, Steve added, having joined the call. That's about 40 households. It's a heavy lift. What if I get the signatures? I asked. There was a pause. If you can get 40 household signatures on a petition to recall Patricia and hold a special election, we can make it happen, Steve said. But Isaac, she'll make your life hell in the meantime. She's already doing that, I pointed out. I spent the next 2 weeks going door to door in the neighborhood, explaining the situation to my neighbors. Most people had their own Patricia horror stories. There was the couple who'd been fined for having the wrong shade of beige on their garage door. The family cited for their children's toys being visible in the backyard. The elderly woman who'd been harassed about her garden gnomes until she removed them in tears. The petition circulated quickly. Within 10 days, I had signatures from 53 households, well over the required threshold. I submitted it formally to the HOA board with delivery confirmation. Patricia's response was swift and unhinged. She declared the petition invalid due to irregular signatures. When Steve and Linda overruled her and scheduled a recall vote for March 15th, she issued a blanket fine to every household that had signed the petition, citing various made-up violations. That's when people started getting seriously angry. A neighborhood Facebook group that had been relatively quiet suddenly exploded with activity. People shared stories of Patricia's abuses of power. Someone dug up the HOA bylaws and pointed out that the president couldn't unilaterally issue fines without board approval, which Patricia had been doing for months. Derek, my attorney friend, reviewed all my documentation and whistled low. Isaac, she's opened herself up to serious legal liability here. This is textbook harassment and abuse of authority. If you wanted to, you could probably sue her personally and the HOA. I just want her out of power, I said. The recall vote is in 3 weeks. Yeah, but if she keeps escalating, you might need legal intervention sooner, Derek warned. Keep documenting everything. His warning proved prescient. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my door. Patricia had issued an emergency order requiring the immediate removal of my boulder, with daily fines of $100 until compliance. The notice claimed the boulder presented an immediate and ongoing safety hazard to the community. I called Steve immediately. Did you approve this? Hell no, Steve said, sounding furious. I just got the same notice you did. She sent it out without board approval. Linda and I are calling an emergency meeting tomorrow to address this. Patricia's gone completely off the rails. The emergency meeting was tense. Patricia insisted she had the authority to issue emergency orders for safety hazards. Steve and Linda disagreed. Voices were raised. At one point, Patricia actually pounded on the table and screamed that if the board wouldn't support her, she'd find board members who would. You can't fire us, Patricia, Linda said, having apparently found her spine. Board positions are elected. We'll see about that, Patricia shrieked. The meeting ended with Steve and Linda officially voting to rescind Patricia's emergency order and formally reprimand her for acting without board authority. Patricia stormed out, muttering threats under her breath. I thought that might be the end of the worst of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I woke up to find my boulder spray painted with bright orange graffiti reading hazard. My Ring doorbell had captured the whole thing. At 3 a.m., Patricia had crept onto my property and vandalized my landscaping. I called the police. Officer Martinez arrived within 30 minutes, reviewed the footage, and shook his head. That's pretty clear-cut vandalism and trespassing. Do you want to press charges? I thought about it. Part of me hesitated because despite everything, Patricia was still my neighbor. But Derek's voice echoed in my head about her escalating behavior. Yes, I said. I want to press charges. Officer Martinez nodded. I'll need a copy of that footage. Within hours, Patricia was issued a citation for criminal mischief and trespassing. She had to appear in court. The neighborhood Facebook group went wild with the news. Support for the recall vote became nearly unanimous. But Patricia wasn't done. She hired a lawyer, some slick guy from Denver who specialized in HOA law. The lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter demanding I stop defaming Patricia and drop the criminal charges. I forwarded it to Derek, who sent back an even more strongly worded letter explaining that truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and that I had every right to press charges for actual crimes committed against my property. The lawyer also filed a motion with the county court seeking an emergency injunction to force the removal of my boulder, claiming it was a public safety hazard. The judge took one look at the evidence, including the video of Patricia vandalizing my property, and denied the motion with prejudice, noting that a landscaping boulder on private property presented no public safety issue and questioning the attorney's judgment in bringing such a frivolous motion. That court denial seemed to push Patricia over some invisible edge. She started leaving handwritten notes on cars parked on my street, warning visitors about the dangerous property owner at my address. She filed a complaint with the city zoning board claiming my boulder violated setback requirements, which it didn't. She even contacted my employer somehow and tried to complain about me, though my boss just called me laughing about the crazy woman who'd wasted 20 minutes of his day ranting about HOA violations. The criminal court date for the vandalism arrived in late February. Patricia showed up with her expensive lawyer and pleaded not guilty, claiming the video evidence was somehow doctored or that it wasn't really her in the footage, despite it clearly showing her face and her car. The judge was not impressed. "Madam, I can see your face clearly in this video. I can see your license plate. The timestamp matches the police report. Do you really want to proceed with a not guilty plea?" Patricia's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Finally, she changed her plea to guilty. The judge sentenced her to community service, ordered restitution for cleaning the boulder, and issued a restraining order requiring her to stay off my property. "Madam, I'm going to be very clear," the judge said sternly. "This appears to be part of an ongoing harassment campaign. If you appear before me again on any similar charges, I will not be so lenient. Do you understand?" Patricia nodded, her face bright red with humiliation and rage. The recall vote was scheduled for March 15th, now just 2 weeks away. The neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. Attendance was expected to be the highest in HOA history. People were actually excited about an HOA meeting, which had to be some kind of record. Patricia spent those 2 weeks campaigning desperately to keep her position. She went door to door, promising to lower HOA fees and to be more collaborative in her leadership. She sent out a long email to all residents apologizing for any misunderstandings and promising to do better. She even had her husband Martin going around trying to drum up support, though the poor man looked exhausted and defeated. Steve and Linda, meanwhile, organized several informal neighborhood gatherings where people could discuss HOA concerns and potential new leadership. The contrast between Patricia's manic campaigning and their calm, rational approach was striking. I tried to stay out of the spotlight during those 2 weeks. I'd accomplished what I needed to by getting the recall vote scheduled. I didn't want Patricia to be able to claim this was all about my personal vendetta, but she couldn't help herself. A week before the vote, she sent out another email blast to all residents, this one claiming that I was orchestrating a campaign of lies and manipulation to seize control of the HOA for my own nefarious purposes. The email was so unhinged and full of wild accusations that it actually backfired spectacularly. Multiple people who had been on the fence about the recall told me that email had convinced them Patricia needed to go. March 15th arrived cold but clear, snow finally beginning to melt after a long winter. The community center was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. I'd never seen anything like it for an HOA meeting. Steve called the meeting to order and explained the recall process. Patricia would have a chance to speak in her defense. Then the floor would be open for community comments. And finally, there would be a vote. A simple majority of present households would determine whether Patricia was recalled. Patricia's speech was a masterclass in manipulation and self-pity. She painted herself as a dedicated public servant who'd been viciously attacked for trying to keep the community safe and beautiful. She claimed I'd orchestrated a harassment campaign against her, because she'd rightfully held me accountable for property violations. She actually cried at one point, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I've given 5 years of my life to this community," she said, her voice trembling. "I've worked tirelessly without thanks to maintain our property values and ensure our neighborhood remains a desirable place to live. And this is how I'm repaid, with lies and betrayal." A few people actually looked moved. Patricia had always been good at performing. Then the floor opened for comments. One by one, residents stood up to share their experiences with Patricia's leadership. The couple fined for their garage door color. The family harassed about their children's toys. The elderly woman and her garden gnomes, who stood up with tears in her eyes to describe how Patricia's bullying had made her feel unwelcome in her own home. A man I didn't know stood up and explained how Patricia had threatened him with fines when he'd questioned one of her decisions at a previous meeting. Another woman described being issued bogus citations as retaliation for not voting Patricia's way on a different issue. The stories went on for over an hour. By the end, Patricia's face had gone from red to white to a mottled combination of both. Her lawyer, sitting beside her, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. When it was finally time to vote, Steve distributed paper ballots to ensure anonymity and prevent any accusations of intimidation. The vote was clear and overwhelming. Out of 83 households present, 71 voted to recall Patricia Henderson from her position as HOA president. Patricia sat frozen in her chair as Steve announced the results. For a moment, I thought she might accept defeat gracefully. I should have known better. She stood up suddenly, knocking her chair backward. "This is illegal. This vote is invalid. I'm calling my lawyer. You can't do this to me." "Patricia, the vote was conducted according to HOA bylaws," Steve said calmly. "You're no longer the president. Please surrender any HOA property in your possession, including files and account access information." "No, I won't. This is a coup." Patricia was screaming now, her face purple with rage. "You're all going to regret this. I'll sue every single one of you." Security, just 2 off-duty police officers hired for the evening, stepped forward. "Madam, you need to calm down. Don't touch me. I'm the president. I'm calling the police." "Madam, we are the police," one officer said patiently. "You need to leave the building now. You can arrange to turn over HOA materials tomorrow during business hours." Patricia's lawyer was pulling her toward the door, whispering urgently. She finally allowed herself to be let out, but not before turning to scream at the room one final time. "This isn't over. None of you know what you've done. That boulder is still a hazard, and Isaac Patterson is still a danger to this community. Mark my words, you'll all be sorry." The doors closed behind her, and the room erupted in applause. Steve called the meeting back to order. "We need to hold an immediate election for a new president. Are there any nominations?" Linda was nominated and elected unanimously. Her first act as president was to formally rescind all of Patricia's unauthorized fines and to issue a formal apology on behalf of the HOA to everyone Patricia had harassed. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. It was finally over, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke to find my boulder gone. My landscaping was torn up, my decorative gravel scattered across the lawn, and deep tire tracks suggested heavy equipment had been used. My Ring doorbell footage showed a landscaping truck arriving at 4 a.m., 3 men quickly removing the boulder and driving away. The truck's company name was clearly visible. I called the police immediately. Officer Martinez arrived, looking tired. "Let me guess, Patricia." "The truck belongs to Mile High Landscaping," I said, showing him the footage. "I never authorized them to remove anything from my property." Martinez made some calls. Within an hour, we had confirmation. Patricia had called Mile High Landscaping the previous evening, claiming to represent the HOA and saying there was an emergency order to remove a hazard from my property. She'd paid them cash to do it first thing in the morning, before I'd be awake to stop them. That's theft, Martinez said flatly. That boulder was your property. She hired someone to steal it from your land. That's not just civil, that's criminal. The landscaping company was cooperative once they realized they'd been duped. They still had the boulder at their yard and agreed to return it and repair my landscaping at no cost to me. They were furious with Patricia for putting them in legal jeopardy. Patricia was charged with theft and criminal mischief, both misdemeanors. Combined with her previous conviction, the prosecutor told me, she was facing possible jail time. Derek advised me to also file a civil lawsuit for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You've got documentation of months of escalating harassment, abuse of HOA authority, and now actual theft. A judge will take this seriously. I filed the lawsuit in early April. Patricia's lawyer, apparently having had enough, withdrew from representing her. She had to scramble to find new representation, finally settling on a small firm that specialized in defending difficult clients. The civil case was scheduled for July. In the meantime, the criminal charges proceeded. In May, Patricia went to trial for the theft charges. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the landscaping company's testimony, the paper trail of her payment, everything pointed to a deliberate act of theft and vandalism. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty on both counts. The judge, the same one who'd handled her previous vandalism case, was not pleased to see her again. "Miss Henderson, I warned you that I would not be lenient if you appeared before me again," he said sternly. "You've shown a pattern of harassment, abuse of authority, and criminal behavior toward your neighbor. This court sentences you to 90 days in county jail, followed by 2 years probation. You're also ordered to pay restitution for all damages and legal fees incurred by Mr. Patterson." Patricia's face crumpled. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, still protesting that she'd done nothing wrong, that I was the real criminal, that the boulder had been a hazard. The civil trial in July was almost anticlimactic. With Patricia's criminal convictions on record and my extensive documentation of her harassment campaign, her new lawyer advised her to settle. We reached an agreement where Patricia paid me $25,000 for emotional distress, harassment, and all my legal fees. She also signed an agreement to have no contact with me beyond what was absolutely necessary as neighbors, and to never hold any position of authority in any HOA again. Patricia served her 90 days and moved out of Meadowbrook Hills before her release. Martin filed for divorce while she was in jail. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he'd been wanting to leave for years, but had been too afraid of her reaction. Her criminal behavior had finally given him the courage to do it. Linda proved to be an excellent HOA president. She instituted reforms to prevent any future president from abusing their authority the way Patricia had. She established clear checks and balances, required board approval for all fines and major decisions, and created a formal appeals process for any resident who felt they'd been treated unfairly. The neighborhood transformed over the following months. Without Patricia's constant threats and nitpicking, people relaxed. Gardens became more creative. Kids' toys appeared in yards without fear of citation. One family even put up a pink flamingo lawn ornament as a joke, and instead of complaints, it started a trend. By the end of summer, there were decorative lawn ornaments up and down the street, each more ridiculous than the last. My boulder, professionally reinstalled and surrounded by new landscaping, became a minor neighborhood landmark. Kids would touch it for good luck on their way to the school bus. Someone started a tradition of leaving painted rocks around it, little stones decorated with inspirational messages or silly drawings. It was like the whole community had reclaimed the thing that Patricia had tried to use as a weapon against me. Robert, my elderly neighbor who'd provided the crucial security footage, passed away peacefully in his sleep in September. At his funeral, his daughter thanked me for standing up to Patricia. Dad was so stressed about her, she told me. He was afraid she'd find some reason to fine him or make his life miserable. After you started the recall, he said it was like a weight lifted off the whole neighborhood. His last few months were happy because of that. I won't pretend that made everything worth it, but it did make it feel meaningful. Steve ended up running for city council the following spring and won, partly on a platform of HOA reform and preventing abuse of authority in neighborhood organizations. He pushed through city ordinances requiring HOAs to have formal complaint processes and giving homeowners more protections against capricious fines and rules. As for me, I just enjoyed my house, my boulder, and my peaceful driveway. I never did get around to upgrading my security cameras, though. The Ring doorbell and Robert's old system, which his daughter let me maintain, seemed to be working just fine. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up to bullies, even when they have institutional authority behind them. Patricia had counted on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back against her petty tyranny. For years, it had worked. But once someone finally pushed back, hard enough and with enough documentation, her whole facade crumbled. I still live in Meadowbrook Hills. I still serve on the HOA board now, actually, as treasurer. Linda asked me to run, and I figured after everything I'd been through, I might as well help make sure the organization actually served the community instead of terrorizing it. Every winter, when the snow starts falling, I make sure my driveway is cleared promptly. Not because I'm afraid of fines, but because it's the responsible thing to do. And every time I look at my boulder, solid and immovable at the edge of my driveway, I smile a little. Patricia Henderson had tried to make that boulder a symbol of my supposed recklessness and disregard for the community. Instead, it became a symbol of standing up to abuse and of a neighborhood coming together to reclaim its own peace and autonomy. The last I heard, Patricia was living in a condo in Denver, somewhere without an HOA. I hope she's happier there, though I doubt it. Some people carry their misery with them wherever they go. As for me, I'm just grateful for my home, my neighbors, and my perfectly legal, completely hazard-free landscaping boulder. And I'm grateful I took those photos on that snowy January morning, because without documentation, Patricia's version of events might have been the one that mattered. The whole saga, from that first crunch of metal on stone to the final settlement check, took 18 months of my life. 18 months of stress, legal fees, sleepless nights, and constant vigilance. But it was worth it, not just for me, but for every neighbor who'd suffered under Patricia's reign and been too afraid to speak up. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I just paid for her repairs that first day, if I'd let her intimidate me into accepting responsibility for her mistake. The cost would have been more than just money. It would have validated her behavior, encouraged her to keep abusing her authority, and ensured that nothing ever changed in Meadowbrook Hills. Standing up to her was the harder path, but it was the right one. And now, when I'm sitting on my porch on a summer evening, watching kids play in the street and neighbors chatting over fences without fear of arbitrary citations, I know it was worth every minute of frustration and every dollar spent on legal fees. My boulder sits exactly where it always has, a solid reminder that sometimes, when someone tries to move you, the best response is simply to stand firm. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. And Meadowbrook Hills learned that a community is stronger than any one tyrant, no matter how much authority they think they have. The painted rocks that neighbors leave around my boulder have become a sort of neighborhood message board. Messages of kindness, jokes, little declarations of community spirit. Last week, someone left one that made me laugh out loud. It was painted bright orange like the graffiti Patricia had sprayed, but instead of hazard, it read Hero Boulder. I kept that one on my windowsill, a small monument to the absurdity of the whole situation and the community that came together to end it. Life is peaceful now in Meadowbrook Hills. The HOA handles actual community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. Fines are rare and always justified and approved by the full board. Disputes are handled with mediation and common sense, rather than threats and arbitrary rules. And my driveway remains perfectly safe, my boulder remains exactly where it belongs, and Patricia Henderson remains exactly where she should be, far away from any position of power over others. Justice, sometimes, actually does prevail. It just takes documentation, persistence, and the courage to stand up and say no when someone with authority tries to abuse it. That's the real lesson of my HOA nightmare. Bullies count on your silence and your fear. The moment you refuse to give them either, their power disappears like snow melting in the spring sun. Patricia found that out the hard way, and my neighborhood is better for it.